Border czar Tom Homan announces an immediate drawdown of federal immigration agents in Minneapolis as Congress passes a government funding bill giving itself only a matter of weeks to cut a deal on new rules for ICE agents. Plus, the Justice Department releases more than 3 million pages of the Epstein files while failing to redact sensitive information for dozens of victims.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We're joined today by my colleague on the opinion pages, Matt Continetti, who writes for the WSJ's new Free Expression newsletter. 700 federal agents are now scheduled to leave Minneapolis immediately, Border czar Tom Homan said in a press conference on Wednesday morning. That will bring the total force in the Twin Cities down to about 2,000, which is still much more than the usual, he said, of about 150 officers. Homan also insists that this is no retreat from Minneapolis. Listen to this.
Given this increase in unprecedented collaboration, and as a result of the need for less law enforcement officers to do this work in a safer environment, I have announced effective immediately, we will draw down 700 people effective today. 700 law enforcement personnel. We have also fully integrated CBP personnel into the ICRO team structure under one unified chain of command. Not two chains of command, there'd be one chain of command here. Any large enforcement operation I've ever been involved with, there's one chain of command, and that's where we're moving forward.
Matt, I don't doubt that the Border czar is trying to get some cooperation and probably getting some better cooperation from the state and from local sheriffs, though it is also hard for me to see this as anything but a recognition by the Trump administration that its surge in Minneapolis had gone overboard. And also, the one person that I've had my eye on in this is Hennepin County Sheriff DeWanna Witt, because she is who controls the local jail in Minneapolis. And so far, she had been saying, essentially, we don't do civil immigration enforcement. We don't cooperate with ICE in our jail. I have not seen any update on that as of yet. CBS had an interview with her on Tuesday. And here is a piece of the CBS story. It says, nonetheless, she has left the door open to limited cooperation. The sheriff of Minnesota's largest county, home to Minneapolis, says she's considering whether to notify ICE before releasing people accused of the worst crimes, murder, rape, and violent felonies. So just to underline that, Matt, here you have still on Tuesday, the sheriff of the county where Minneapolis is, the jail there, saying, I'm considering perhaps letting ICE know when we are going to let violent felons out so that they can come pick them up.
Right. And I think Tom Homan mentioned that there were still some sheriffs that he has yet to secure agreements with over the course of his press conference this morning, Kyle. I would just take a step back and think about how we got to this point. And there is no doubt within the Trump administration, and certainly among Republicans in Washington, that the killing of 2 American citizens in the space of 2.5 weeks as part of this Operation Metro Surge had created a political backlash against the administration's enforcement in Minneapolis-St. Paul region. And so President Trump, I think, acted rather quickly to address this problem. He dispatched Tom Homan there to take over the operation from Commander-at-Large Greg Bovino, who is not actually the Border Patrol head, but someone that Homeland Secretary Kristi Noem had elevated to oversee these ICE operations around the country. So Homan was now in charge in Minneapolis. And I think the change came very quickly. We saw it in his press conference last week, where he appeared in civilian clothes like he did today, unlike Bovino. He spoke very softly in both the first press conference last week and the press conference today. He stressed that he was talking to local officials in both cases. And he also signaled this shift in the administration strategy, which is rather than go for these kind of spectacular shock and awe deportation operations in the streets, which attracted so many of the protesters and agitators, he would work with the sheriffs to get the criminal illegal aliens into ICE custody as they were being released from the jails. So when I looked at this press conference, I saw Homan building on the strategy that he began enacting last week and saying that as a result of the cooperation he has secured thus far, he will be withdrawing 700 ICE agents from the region as an attempt to de-escalate the situation from where we were in January. I think actually they've done a good job in de-escalating the situation, even though many of these protests and interference with ICE operations still take place day to day.
Meantime, in Congress, the bill to fund much of the federal government and end a short government shutdown passed the House on Tuesday, 217 to 214. But this 2-week punt on funding for the Department of Homeland Security, including the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, is now there's now jockeying about what that might look like. Matt, reporting in Politico and other publications that it looks unlikely that there would be some swift deal by the deadline, which I guess is next Friday, February 13th.
Yes.
Otherwise, we will get a DHS shutdown. DHS also includes the Transportation Security Administration. So that is the security checks at airports. Those people might end up going out without paychecks if that's not funded, which, if they don't show up for work, as some of the air traffic controllers did not last year, you can see some real travel snarls in the United States. But what's difficult, Matt, to think about is where there might be some agreement to be had between Republicans and Democrats. One that had been floated was body cams for ICE agents. And notably, the Trump administration is now already moved to do that. Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem a couple days ago announcing that they are immediately sending body cameras to any ICE agents, Border Patrol agents in Minneapolis that don't have them. And then we'll roll that out nationwide as funding makes itself available. So that's one potential point of compromise. But Democrats are also talking about a no mask policy potentially, requiring judicial warrants for ICE arrests and so forth. Republicans are saying there's no way that they're going to go along with either of those. By the way, Republicans are also suggesting if we're going to do some sort of rules, we should have some sort of policy in this bill that would crack down on sanctuary cities. So, Matt, I don't know if you see any path out of this, or if we're just going to have to see what these two sides can jockey and come up with, or maybe it will take the pain of some kind of partial government shutdown to get anything over the line.
Kyle, we were so close to having the government funded through the rest of the fiscal year through regular order, which has been a longstanding goal of House Speaker Mike Johnson and Senate Leader John Thune. We were this close, but then again, this explosion in Minneapolis happened with the deaths of Renee Good and Alex Preddy, and that led the Democrats to demand changes to the DHS budget, specifically changes in ICE policy, before they let that part of the government be funded through September 30th. So as you say, three major demands from the Democrats: one, the body cams; two, the restrictions on these administrative warrants, which allow the ICE agents to enter homes without a separate judicial warrant; and then three, the Democrats are also demanding the demasking of the ICE agents. On the first one, body cams, I think DHS is already there. Tom Homan in the press conference said that he supports that. In fact, there's money in the One Big Beautiful Bill to supply those ICE agents nationwide with body cams. But on the other two items, I think the Democrats will face stiff resistance. And I think there are legitimate reasons why Republicans would, want to say that administrative warrants still can be used. That's the only way that the mass deportation program will be able to proceed without, huge backlogs in requiring the judicial warrants. And secondly, on the masks, it is just the case that these ICE agents do face harassment. They face doxing. They face violent threats. It's unfortunate, but it does seem to be necessary for their safety. I think what we can look at is if the situation in Minneapolis calms down, if President Trump continues with the approach he's taken in the past 2 weeks of saying that Americans should not be killed in the middle of these enforcement operations, that he wants to work with the Democrats to find some ways to have this mass deportation program take place, but with as minimal disruption as possible to everyday life, and of course to life itself, then you might see some Democrats give a little and get the government funded, because it's not just the TSA that's part of DHS, as you know, it's also FEMA. And when you have a situation where much of the country is under, it seems like 3 feet of snowcrete, I don't think it would be in the Democrats' interest to stop the FEMA operations along with ICE operations. So when this partial shutdown began, I think the politics of the moment favored the Democrats. But I think as we see Homan do his work in Minnesota, as we see the Trump administration take this different approach to Capitol Hill, I think we have the politics adjusting more in the Republicans' favor. Let's not forget, even while we see these polls that show Americans disapproving of ICE enforcement operations or methods, Americans still support the overall goal of the deportations, addressing that open border that America had under 4 years of Joe Biden.
A couple thoughts I would add on that. One, on the point about administrative warrants and the rationale for Republican hesitation there. We got a letter from one listener in response to the last time we talked about the Hennepin County Sheriff DeWanna Witt, who had suggested that ICE could just get a warrant, not understanding why there was hesitation there. And I think that there's a couple things. One is that given the numbers that Trump wants to hit in terms of his mass deportation policy, I think he considers that it would be too burdensome and difficult to go through the judicial system when the immigration question has always, I think, been an administrative process. Immigration judges are housed within the executive branch. And so ICE can have an administrative warrant to go get somebody and pick them up in a public space, in a courthouse, on the street outside the jail. And so their argument is, if we have this administrative warrant and we can pick the person up when he walks out of the jail, why will the sheriff not let us go get that person while he is still in the jail inside the building, even though that is not public space? So I think that is some of the argument there. As far as the politics goes, maybe you're right, it's shifting a little bit back towards Republicans, though it also depends, I think, on what happens from here, because there are still, according to Homan, 2,000 agents in Minneapolis. He almost pleaded for protesters on the streets there to, quit setting up barricades, quit blocking cars and traffic. Saying that we support the right to protest. You can observe, but you cannot impede our activities. He said that he would not remove more agents, potentially, the agents that are protecting those immigration officers on the ground who are actually doing the arrests, until there is some change in the status quo. And then we also don't know, Matt, where ICE might show up next, because we've seen pushes by the Trump administration in several cities now, Minneapolis being only the latest. And those 700 ICE agents that are being moved from Minneapolis are going to go somewhere. And I guess the next question will be whether we are going to see a similar sort of conflagration, perhaps, with protesters and ICE agents, law enforcement agents on the streets somewhere else, potentially, which, maybe would not be the smartest approach if President Trump is trying to de-escalate overall as we get closer to these November midterms.
That's right. I think what the public really rejects is lawlessness. And so when you have a situation where people are being killed under these very unusual circumstances and the videos go viral, that conveys a sense of disorder and chaos to the American public. And the American public understandably says, we don't want this, enough of this. But if the lawlessness is coming from the protesters, then I think history suggests that the public will react against the protesters. And so this is why I think it's very important for Homan to have said that, the more cooperation he gets from the local sheriffs, the fewer agents are required on the streets. The fewer agents on the streets mean that there's less opportunity for these types of combustible interactions between the ICE officers and this left-wing movement, which is trying to disrupt and interfere and harass law enforcement operations. So I'm always very cautious when I see kind of these quick public reactions to a very sensational killing. And we'll just remember, I mean, if 6 years ago, almost, in Minneapolis, George Floyd was killed. Of course, Americans did not like to see George Floyd killed. But when the election came around, Americans had also were prepared to voice their upset at the riots that ensued upon George Floyd's death, including the burning of the police precinct in Minneapolis, which was kind of apologized for by Minneapolis Mayor Frey and Governor Walz, both of whom are at the center of this argument right now. So I guess I'm a little bit of a contrarian on how the politics of this will shape up in the median term rather than the short term, where they clearly have been bad for the administration.
Let's turn to the government's latest release of the so-called Epstein files related to the government's investigatory material into the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Another 3 million pages more was posted by the Justice Department on Friday, and almost immediate blowback at failures of redaction. So the Journal reports that there were at least 43 victims whose names were not blacked out in the initial release of these files. This is from the Journal story, including many who haven't shared their identities publicly or were minors when they were abused, including some of their addresses and email addresses not properly redacted. The New York Times reported that there were dozens of unredacted nude images showing faces of, quote, young women or possibly teenagers, unquote. Let's first listen to Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche responding to some of these failures on Fox News.
Yeah, look, you're right. I mean, there mistakes were made by, you have really hardworking lawyers that worked for the past 60 days. Think about this, though. You're talking about pieces of paper that stack from the ground to 2 Eiffel Towers. And so the minute that a victim or their lawyer reached out to us since Friday, we immediately dealt with it and pulled it down, and we're continuing to do that. We knew that there would be mistakes. We put that, I said that to the American people on Friday. Everything we did was protect victims, and that's the case today, just like it was on Friday. And what we're talking about, by the way, is 0.002% of
but it matters to them, right?
Matt, I guess I have some sympathy here for the Justice Department's position, and Congress is now pointing fingers saying, why didn't you properly redact this? But remember the context here. There are millions and millions of pages of documents. Congress passed a law last year that demanded they all be released within 30 days. And then when the Justice Department didn't hit that deadline, there started to be talk of maybe holding the Attorney General in contempt or maybe impeaching the Attorney General. And this is why, this exact reasoning is why this kind of raw investigatory material is not released. The general operating procedure of the federal government, for good reason, I think, is if there are charges to be brought, if there's a criminal case to be brought, we will do that. And if there's not, if we've finished the investigation, then we keep all that stuff in the file cabinet.
Yeah. I mean, and then you have, of course, people who are merely mentioned in the documents, who had exchanged even, a single email with Jeffrey Epstein, are being dragged into the social media limelight and being called somehow part of the overall conspiracy. I think this is a case of Congress reaping what it sowed. There was a rush to demand these documents from the Justice Department. There was this arbitrary deadline imposed. And now, of course, we're dealing with the fallout. And you even have some suits filed with judges to reseal the material. So this process is going to go on and on. Just a couple comments. The first is, Jeffrey Epstein must be the most photographed and documented person in the history of the human species, because it's incredible to me just how many images and photos and emails have been generated as a result of this case. It's mind-boggling. And you have people like random journalists like David Brooks and Nellie Bowles who show up in these documents completely unrelated to anything regarding the actual crimes that Jeffrey Epstein committed, or even the kind of professional network that he cultivated that has been so much focus of these journalistic and legal inquiries. So that is just mind-boggling to me. And I think it speaks to exactly what you're saying, is that this type of raw material should not be released because in truth, we all have something like that, right? I mean, we all have all these connections we make that we never realized will be publicly scrutinized or turned into material for some conspiracy theory. And the second point I make is it is also fascinating to me that much of the fallout of this scandal has not affected President Trump. It's affected actually royals, British members of the British establishment, and members of the Democratic establishment. And it's kind of curious as all these disclosures come out. And while there are many mentions of Trump in the documents, much of it is just almost instantaneously easily dismissed as a rumor and accusation. But it's high-profile Democrats, economists, left-wing political philosophers like Noam Chomsky, former President Clinton. They are the ones who are becoming ensnared in this scandal that doesn't seem to show any signs of going away.
But scandal perhaps is the right word, because there are all sorts of people who in recent days are now apologizing for having any connection, anything to do with Jeffrey Epstein, trying to explain that they were trying to raise money for some good cause. They didn't understand what he had originally been charged with in Florida, apologizing for making jokes and emails to him that you could characterize as embarrassing or, nauseating, pick your adjective. But scandal, again, is not what the Justice Department is supposed to be about. It is supposed to be about criminal cases and criminal charges that can be proved to a jury. And remember, we have now had two administrations, the first Trump administration and the Biden administration, and now the second Trump administration, that have not been able to bring any actual criminal charges against any of Epstein's associates. And so it just seems to me that it's a mistake to air all of this stuff, a lot of which is unverified. You can't even tell if it's true. Another person who's making this argument, making this point, is Jay Clayton, the U.S. attorney, the federal prosecutor for Manhattan. Here he is on CNBC.
These files are raw. When someone calls the Justice Department, when someone calls the FBI and says, I want to report a crime, you're required to take that information down. You're required to record it. Now, you don't know the veracity of that. You don't know the motivations. What you are seeing is the reason that we don't release this material. It should be the very exceptional circumstance, very, very exceptional circumstance where we release this material for all the reasons you're seeing. The victim protection, paramount, but there are allegations in there that with 10 or 15 minutes of work, you can realize have no basis in fact.
Right. A lot of them.
A lot of them.
Matt, there you have it. A top federal prosecutor saying there's a lot of stuff in this that we know is not true, and yet we have been required by Congress to upload it all to the internet. And by the way, now there are people who predictably saying that the Epstein files are still being covered up. Congressman Ro Khanna, who, by the way, I think is a likely presidential candidate sometime in the future, suggesting that this is not good enough. He won't be satisfied. He might still try to impeach the attorney general or hold her in contempt unless they get more files. Matt, it looks to me like this has become a bipartisan sort of conspiracy theory now, because you had people on the right when the Biden administration was in power saying that the elites are covering this up, including Kash Patel, now the FBI director. Well, then he gets into office and is trying to soberly explain to all of the people who were watching him on that podcast 2 years ago, like, listen, we actually have looked at this. We have a lot of abuse material. We're not going to release that. And then he's getting raked over the coals by Democrats whenever he goes up on Capitol Hill, now accusing him of covering this up. It's almost a sign maybe of how unserious our politics has gotten these days, that this is what Congress is focused on.
Yeah, I mean, it shows you just how insatiable the appetite for conspiracy theory is in America in 2026, and also how social media fuels that appetite. And as a longtime colleague of mine once put it, social media really solves the organizing problem for mobs. And so if you find enough people who feel intensely that the government has been somehow hiding the truth about Jeffrey Epstein and his circle, you can use social media pressure. And then political entrepreneurs such as Ro Khanna and Tom Massey, the Republican from Kentucky, can kind of exploit that intensity online in order to get a discharge petition through the House, and then the Senate agreed to this release of documents as well. The second point I'd make is it does make Clay Higgins' sole vote against releasing the Epstein files a real profile in courage. And it's very rare that you have this type of dissent, that he was the only person to say, look, releasing this material is going to really violate our traditions of due process and criminal procedure. And he wanted to take a stand. It's an extremely lonely stand he took, but I think in retrospect and in the years to come, people will see that he was not only right, but he was courageous in his vote.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.